Now I'd like to talk to you about the teacher as student. And you may think, wait a second, homeschooling parents are the teachers, they're not the students. And that's true. You're the one who's going to be educating your children. However, as Dr. R.J. Rushdoony has so well stated it in his book, The Philosophy of the Christian Curriculum, if a student doesn't have a teacher who continues to learn and continue to grow in her subject, then that poor student has a very poor teacher, and the prospects for real learning are diminished. Homeschool parents need to not only know how to do the basics, reading, writing, arithmetic, knowing how to teach your students proper grammar, knowing how to teach them how to compute well, and obviously to teach your children about the Bible and how God's Word applies to their life. But the teacher needs to be developing a sense of how to better communicate the fact that all areas of life and thought are under the rule and reign of Jesus Christ. Now, you'll hear me say that a lot because it's an important thing. I always tell people, especially those who've been homeschooling for a while and are very harried and they're trying very hard to keep up with the supposed judges out there who are grading them on how they homeschool, I tell them very few people die with their last regret being, I wished I had better communicated the quadratic equation, or if only my students understood indirect objects. Now, don't get me wrong, the quadratic equation is important in certain fields, and it's certainly important to understand what a indirect or a direct object is, certainly in terms of understanding your reading, to be able to say, what does the author mean? But the most important thing that a student needs to get from his teacher are character principles, character matters that will determine what he does with the information he gets. And that's where the homeschooling teacher needs to be diligent in schooling herself on various things that will help her identify the difference, for example, between ignorance in her student and defiance. The difference between someone who is unwilling and someone who is unable. Now, I have a mentoring service where I'm in touch with women who have difficulties. They don't know what to do with a particular child. Their son is now 12, 13, 14 years old, and suddenly he's not as responsive as he was before. Or maybe those who have large families, and the first number of children were very good at a lot of different subjects, and now they have a student who is struggling. The most important part for the parent in continuing to educate herself is to understand how God's Word addresses these issues. Now, a book that was foundational for me, along with Dr. Rushdoony's The Foundation of the Christian Curriculum, was his book, The Institutes of Biblical Law. And many parents are surprised when I tell them that if you want to be a better teacher, you better understand biblical law better. We'll go into some of these ideas as we continue in future segments, but for now, I want to communicate to you that the time you spend in making yourself a better teacher of God's Word, the time you spend in growing in your faith and understanding its implications, by the time your children are older, by the time your children are confronting issues that are not quite so easy to ascertain on their own, they will have a lot more respect for you as their parent and their teacher if you're well versed in these things and you can relate current events and subject matters before them with relationship to God and His Word and what God requires.